Let's get started. The second half of the day, the afternoon. I'm Kimron Flicker from Zengo. Nice to meet you all. Feel free to come up to me later if you'd like to speak. I will be your MC for the afternoon. Let's get started with the first panel of the afternoon called Solid Innovation. In the winter of 2015, Ethereum was built. In the winter of 2019, it was Uniswap and the DeFi ecosystem. What will come next? In this panel, we will explore the deepest fundamental innovations in crypto to date. It's going to be moderated by Tal-Hochberg, the group CTO at Team 8. And our speakers will be Stephanie Ramezan, head of Gemini UK, Mark Smargon, the CEO at Fuse.io, Yonatan Sela, partner at SquarePeg, Hagay Elyakim, Chief Operating Officer at Crymbo, and finally, Caspi, co-founder and CTO at Hypernative.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to our panel. We got to talk about one of the coolest subjects, which is innovation. Before we start doing the panel, maybe we'll do a very quick intro if each person wants to say like a sentence about themselves, introduce themselves, and what's interesting for them. So go ahead.
Hi everyone, my name is Stephanie Ramezan. I am head of Gemini UK. Gemini is the global crypto platform. We are an exchange and a custodian. And we were founded by Tyler and Cameron Winklevoss, who were infamously known for their Facebook days and their disagreement with Mr. Zuckerberg. So we are now global as a regulated crypto exchange and a regulated custodian.
Hi, I'm Mark Smargon, CEO of Fuse. Fuse is building the most consumer and business-friendly blockchain, and I'm a decade in crypto. And I believe that the future of this space is really through business adoption, and this is what we're building at Fuse.
Yonatan Sela, a partner at SquarePeg. We're a $3 billion fund investing in a bunch of things, including crypto, and also investors in Canva, Stripe, Fiverr, and others. Before that, I've been a builder for most of my career. I built 3 companies. One of them was in crypto. Got into the space initially in 2014. Excited to be here.
Hi everyone, Hagay Elyakim. I'm the CEO of Crymbo. Basically, we redefine digital asset adaptation by institutionals. We serve as a 2.5 gateway for institutionals to access the Web3 ecosystem. Basically enable them to access any service provider and make a mix and match using our marketplace to connect different wallets, different liquidity, a different custodian, and build their end-to-end transaction lifecycle, carrier agnostic, and I'm happy to be here.
Hi everyone, Caspi. I'm the co-founder and CTO at Hypernative. We're building a real-time proactive security platform, trying to bring the best practices from Web 2 security into the Web 3 space, both for players of all kinds, exchanges, investors, and more.
All right, thank you. So we have a very, very interesting panel with people from different areas in crypto, from exchanges to payments and investors. So I'm going to be asking you guys questions. Each time I'm going to ask one of you, but feel free to interrupt and answer what you want. The more dynamic, it's going to be the more interesting for them, which is the people who are here to entertain. So in 2021, just like the intro said, we've seen a lot of innovation. We saw, DeFi, we saw NFTs. In general, the crypto market has been evolving and innovating a lot. But since then, and also, by the way, we're seeing movements to like private wallets by Coinbase and Robinhood. There's this, maybe in a sense, the crypto Web3 vision is starting to happen. But then we had, FTX and we had the Terra Luna crashes, and we're, you could say that we're sort of in a bear market right now. And so that also affects regulation, affects innovation. And I want to start by asking you, Hagay, how do you think the environment that we're in is affecting innovation in the DeFi space?
Wow. So first of all, we have been through several disastrous events during the last few months. I think that affects everyone, like the stability of the companies, and I think people are recalculating and companies are recalculating their path. Layer 1, layer 2, let's say mostly, if we look at DeFi, most of the projects are in Ethereum. They're the major carrier, then Solana. I don't know what's going on with Solana today, but let's say the majority are on Ethereum, EVMs. And what I see is maybe will take us back to the early days of the first DeFi, which is Bitcoin, right? The white paper was released in October 2008, and the first block was mined in January 2009. And the basic use case for the Bitcoin was digital cash, peer-to-peer digital cash, for payments, right? And even more than that, it was built for micropayments. Up until now, like 14 years later, the use case of Bitcoin is not used for payments. I don't know a lot of people that use Bitcoin for payments. So this is one thing to think about when we start to think about DeFi. And if I will take the payment side, I think that if I look at the DeFi space today, I think that there is a lot of projects out there. We need to clear up a little bit the space. There's a lot of companies doing a lot of great things, a lot of organizations are building a lot of great things, but it's saturated, really. I can't follow what's going on there. So I think, first of all, there will be a cleanup. And I look at the real projects with real business usability and use case, moving from users to customers. This is first. So using that terms and making it transparent to the customers so they don't need to understand what is the underlying technology. And that will be, I think, the most exciting moments for DeFi projects, those that have deep pockets or are well funded or they're both. And they will be able to survive this freezing crypto winter. The dancing in the ice, I would call it, not in the rain. So, and I think that after that, when we will spotlight the major projects that could bring real business usability to the space, when you can see customers, payments, e-commerce, something that would be different than just a project that can bring value, throughput, that can bring some other things to battle with. And that could bring a real usability to the mass market adoption.
All right, that's very interesting. I think you touched on sort of mass market adoption and like the mess in DeFi or the other things that are happening. Some people say that maybe the next step is something around regulation. So maybe it's a question maybe to Mark and Stephanie, because you guys are touched on that space a lot. Do you think that regulated DeFi is sort of a next step that we're going to see?
I think I think regulators are not necessarily the ones that know how to predict what would be the consumer needs or how the regulation can be more effective. Most of the really important regulation was written in blood. Like literally every, people talk about the Howey test. It was created after the Great Depression, antitrust rules and a lot of rules happen. A lot of regulators know how to react. They usually don't know how to predict. That's one problem. The second problem, you have a regulatory arbitrage. If it was that easy to just close it, like China tried to do, just ban it outright. The regulation in the US. Especially things like BitLicense in New York, led to a situation where FTX is really one of the only exchanges that are regulated in all 50 states. So you basically, regulators right now in the US, it's kind of like they invent a lock and they're selling the keys to select few exchanges. So that's not healthy regulation as well. So anyway, I don't think regulators will save us. And that's a good thing in my opinion.
All right.
I think there's, so there's been a bit of an arbitrage around regulations. So some entities were able to do offshore things like FTX and avoid, but they were generally just centralized financial bodies that were not regulated in the US, even though indirectly they interacted with US persons. But then there will be, I think, a huge mistake if we try to bring regulation that was set up for a system that's been around for dozens and dozens of years. Well, it's been around for hundreds of years, but in its current format for dozens of years, and try to apply that to a fast car. It's like, you know, when cars just came out, before that there were horses and carriages, etc., and they tried to regulate cars the same way they did to carriages and horses. So that obviously didn't work out well, and it took some time to adjust and ultimately bring regulation up to speed with what the tech can actually do. And we've seen that also with internet IP rules or infringement rules of copyright. You just have to adapt to the new technology. So I think if you try to apply standard financial system regulation to DeFi, not to mention that crypto goes far beyond just financial applications, and trying to apply that to NFTs, for example, creates a whole new world. I think that will be a huge mistake, and I think the regulatory arbitrage point is critical. If the US, as a leader that many regulators around the world follow, will seriously fear innovation fleeing out of the US and going elsewhere if regulation becomes unintelligent and just comes in brute force following something like FTX. I really hope that they will not make that mistake, and I think there's enough voices at the SEC that are not about that, but unfortunately at the helm, there's kind of like a contradicting force. So I hope it will be sufficiently nuanced and they're not going to try to apply it. So far, I think, in spite of all the criticism around US regulation, there's been an approach of trying to enable innovation to happen in spite of the need to create boundaries, and I think that's going to play out in a similar way in the next few years.
Yeah, I'll just add one small thing, that two things. One is that the best education is losing money. Like if the regulators will let the users lose money.
But expensive.
I know it's not something that regulators want to enable, you know, but there's no better education than losing money. And the second thing, the best way to regain trust is if the US authorities will put SBF in jail. That's also very important. If, you know, SBF will be out of jail just like, you know, all the bank CEOs and, you know, Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers, and, you know, this is maybe a little bit smaller,
So
but
maybe it's like the
same
banks.
story.
So maybe then we're like the banks. It's good. It's regulated. It's trusted. Then you made a step forward, right?
That's what I'm
Too
saying.
big to
Like,
fail.
we need him in jail so people know what is a clear scam and what
I
is...
thought
you
we were
know.
going to end the panel without mentioning any abbreviation of FTX, SBF, and all of that. But
There's no such panel right now in the world that doesn't talk about
I want to step
SBF.
in on the regulation. There is two things that I think we're missing. Last year, I think the FATF issued a virtual asset service provider legal framework, and we have the MiCA in the EU. And I think that they did try to approach in a way to regulate the DeFi space. I think it's a very nice you know, paper to read, like the legal framework. One more thing is that if you look at the current situation, I mean, you're not regulating an entity, you're regulating a community. And this is a different state of mind. And I think that Mark mentioned that in a different way. But mentioning that, there needs to be a shift in the state of mind also of the regulator regulating the regulated in the DeFi. And I think this would be a very hard case to take because what a regulator are interested basically in the DeFi space. Yeah, and anti-money laundering and funding of terrorism activity. From the other end, protecting the consumer, protecting the user. And we see that today, most of the consumers are holding their funds on private wallets, right? So non-custodial wallets, private hardware wallets. And a funny story I heard, just one thing, just to give you where it's going, like when you think about innovation, one of my colleagues went to his barber and he's sitting and saying, you know, what are you doing? He says, I'm dealing with crypto. He says, wow, that's nice. Can you tell me more about it? And he says, you know, he's telling him now it's a crazy situation, don't buy crypto. And he says, listen, I just bought on Binance and I downloaded it to my Ledger wallet. And he was like looking and he's saying, what? And this is like this is the main usability where you have this massive people, which is not still the mass market, which is holding their funds in private wallets, hardware wallets, and you see all the latest releases from Ledger and Binance on the Engrave and their interaction with the hardware wallets, and you see that part of the I would say the market and the target market is going to enter into the DeFi, but the DeFi needs to be ready to deal with these people and offer them some more usability and more friendly environment to interact with.
All right. Cool. So I learned from this we need better usability. We need to solve real problems, and regulation is not the answer. So for innovation for DeFi. But let's go a little bit in a different direction. We can't talk about DeFi without talking about also CeFi, or centralized exchanges. It's not been a great period for exchanges recently, but on the flip side, exchanges are a critical part of the infrastructure of crypto today. So Stephanie, what can you tell us a little bit about how exchanges are innovating, and how can they navigate what's happening right now to innovate to serve people in the community well?
Sure. I think there's actually two separate answers to one question. And whilst innovation is so key and important, people can get very lost in the technology. And just not to pull the panel back to what we've just been speaking about, but framework is key, but we can't rely on regulators to be policing, right? You've got to have the right players who are actually providing these services with the right intentions. And there are no shortcuts to that. So whilst innovation is key, and we're working in a technology sector, Gemini has been live now coming on almost 9 years. And I find it fascinating that a lot of the exchanges, and beyond the exchanges, other people in the ecosystem are now saying, oh, we need to have audited financials by a big four company. Oh, we all need to be out there doing proof of reserves. Let's all get together and form a club to do this. It's like, well, guess what, guys? We've been doing this since 2014. So innovation, yes, but actually back to basics, back to the fundamentals of having the right intentions and doing things traditionally. God forbid we do tradition when we're trying to innovate, but you can't have one without the other. And as I was saying, there are no shortcuts. And again, we can't have a panel these days without mentioning FTX. But if you look at it, let's talk sports. Someone goes into the Olympics. They've never been seen in previous Olympics before. They're running a 100-meter sprint, and out of nowhere, they have a 5-second lead on everybody else. You would get suspicious, right? That should be the same in business. Where are these companies coming from? Where is the money coming from? When there are returns that are so beyond and outliers to everywhere else, there's got to be something up with that. And yes, it is the responsibility of regulators to put in place a framework, but it's also the responsibility of the companies who are servicing institutions, but also retail clients, to make sure that those people are protected. And you do that by having the right KYC procedures in place, the right AML. Exchanges out there, some of them are out there who are thinking that they're going to replace banks. And that's one strategy. It's not for me. I'm not the authority to say what's right or wrong. But Gemini, for example, we've always seen ourselves as building as a peer to other regulated financial institutions and other high-profile top players, whether that's in the tech space, the legal space, the professional services space. So there's innovation, but there's also harmonization. And then coming on to the innovation question, it's about finding the right product fit within a regulatory framework. And how do you find this product fit? It's about understanding the customers, knowing what is going to be needed to create that coexistence. I find it fascinating being at these conferences. I've been going to crypto conferences since 2017, and the evolution of people on the panel, people in the audience has been fascinating. Up till maybe 1-2 years ago, you would never have a top-tier investment bank sitting on a panel next to a developer or a crypto exchange. And now being international conferences this year, you've got Goldman Sachs sitting next to Morgan Stanley, sitting next to Circle, sitting next to Binance, sitting next to Gemini, and it shows that there is now one ecosystem. It's no longer us and them. So, of course, until regulation comes in, until regulatory clarity comes in, these traditional financial institutions won't be able to touch the underlying of crypto, but that's why the exchanges will innovate, as we already have done, and we continue to do so, by, for example, launching derivatives within a regulated environment, so therefore banks can get involved without actually touching the underlying. We'll be launching perpetual swaps from January. We're already doing options, futures through our voice OTC, and more and more of our clients are coming to us earlier on. It could be 6, 12, 18 months before they're intending on going live, but they realize that it is actually inevitable. And especially when regulated financial institutions come to us, just because you're, for example, in London, an FCA-regulated company by our local regulator, it doesn't mean you can automatically offer crypto to your customers. There's further regulatory status you have to get through the crypto asset register, and they will come to Gemini and want to work with us in partnership in their application to show that they are working with the right partners from day one in their planning, in their application process before they even go live, before they've even built their technology. So that conversation is happening far earlier than it ever used to.
So maybe a follow-up question on that. You sort of said in the beginning, when somebody comes in, they're new and they make a lot of money out of nowhere, so that we should be maybe suspicious of that, and we should work within a framework. But on the other side, it's kind of the whole space of Web3 and crypto became because people did something like that. What advice do you have as somebody who sees both those sides to people in the audience, and how to thread that needle between being careful but then also innovating at the same time, or showing that you're serious without losing a lot of money?
Sure, I mean, and this is not financial advice, I have to say. At the end of the day, look, a rising tide raises all boats. And that happened to a lot of people, and many of us, I'm sure, on this stage and in the audience got very lucky. And unfortunately, it goes the other way. What goes up must come down. But I think it's just about being sensible. And what I found fascinating speaking, I mean, I did 15 years traditional finance in regulated companies in London before I went down the wonderful rabbit hole that is crypto. And people seem to have been making irrational decisions when it came to investments in crypto, whether you want to call that FOMO. I don't like to call it laziness, but because there haven't been necessarily too many options or the education available for people to understand what the reality is of where they're leaving their money, what regulation truly means, what proof of reserve means, what insurance means for them as an end customer. I think from this day forward, of course, there's been a lot of trauma and drama in the market, but out of every crisis comes opportunity, and it will give institutions the opportunity to better educate their customers, and customers the opportunity to better educate themselves. And education is the key piece to that. So, like I said, there's no winning formula, but it's just about making sure you understand the risks and working with the right partners, that what happens in the very worst case scenario, and always being aware of that.
All right, thank you. So if we're talking about risk, there's another risk that we've seen happen a lot, which is cybersecurity risk, or security risk in general. Security in the technology sense, not in the financial regulation sense. Dan, maybe you can tell us a little bit. I think we're seeing a lot of innovation happen in crypto security, Web3 security, DeFi security. What do you see happening there, and where is it going?
Thanks. Yeah, so I think when DeFi started, everyone wanted to do something just to say, well, come over, I'm secured. So the golden standard for that was actually audit. And then you have a lot of audit companies. There are very good ones. There are some that are just kind of a rubber stamp that basically, they get paid, they give you, okay, your code is secured, and you can paste that audit on the website. And I mean, I think customers today, when I'm saying customers, I mean investors, whether professional ones or like professional being, institutionals or some sort of that type of enterprise or consumers, they know to search for an audit. So if they see like a protocol with not being audited, I think it's less attractive. And we see that more people are actually looking for the good audits, which is good. That's nice, but the problem being that all the major hacks that we've heard of, all were audited, and the big ones were audited by good companies. So if you look at audits being done by probably one of the best name would be Open Zeppelin, Kudelski, other companies. So those protocols are being hacked. And the reason being that once you do an audit, so it's a static thing. So you do an audit for whoever is not like in the depth of coding and that thing. So basically someone very, very smart looks at your code, says that it's fine. And when he says that it's fine, or she, of course, deploy the code, and that's it. Now it's game on for the hackers to start and searching. And having Binance Bridge being hacked a few months ago, we all know that Binance have enough resources to invest in audit. And there you go, it was hacked. So answering your question, I think the trend now is migrating towards being more proactive. So once the code has been released, we need to monitor the contracts. We need to see the flow of funds. We need to understand if someone is tinkering with the contract, if it's doing something which is not not the way it's supposed to react. A lot of times you can actually see that something is about to happen. You can identify a strange behavior, and then it's about that protocol to see how the protocol can react. So what basically we're identifying is a movement towards building Web 2 constructs that we have in like cloud security and Web 2 security, which are teams that are basically focused on monitoring, looking at the behavior of things, both from the protocol side and from the investor side, and acting on it as soon as possible. So sometimes you can outright prevent the whole loss. Sometimes you can reduce it. But the thought that basically you have contracts managing billions and billions of dollars. I mean, the big ones like, the Aave and Compound, but, others that are managing hundreds of millions and tens of millions are just running without anyone looking at it in real time and getting alerts and stuff like that. This is something which is really unique in technology to crypto. There is no one that has ever developed anything doesn't have, that type of solution. And that's, I think, where we see security kind of going forward.
I think that what you said is really important, that in crypto, it's the first time that somebody can write a contract, open source, other people can pour billions into it and battle test it in real time. And I think...
So you're still going with the education through money loss method.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
Okay.
And I think that right now, crypto is not really being used by anybody like close to mainstream. It's really being used by 30 million, I would say, developers / investors. And a lot of degens that follow them. And they know how to use MetaMask, and they know what is gas, and they understand the risks, and maybe they don't. But if you look at a little bit of perspective, 3 years ago, in 2017, in the last bull run, there was no DeFi, there was no stable coins, there was no NFTs, there was no leverage. The most complicated contract was the DAO. And after that was hacked, and everybody said, okay, now we can pour billions into it. So everything under the hood is open. Everybody can take a peep inside. All security practices are being upgraded across the board because everything is public. Banks don't have that. So that's, I think, one of the killer features.
Interesting. All right, so we've been very serious to talk about risk and regulation. One thing that has captured mainstream imagination has been NFTs. Does anybody want to talk about a little bit about what you think is innovative and interesting in NFTs and where we're going next there?
I mean, I've started off. Sorry, Hagay.
Go ahead. Ladies first.
Thank you. For lack of a better expression, I think NFTs, in the way that have been known in the last year or two, through being synonymous with digital art, have been a gateway drug. Most people outside of the crypto industry who hear the word NFT, if they are familiar, they'll think that an NFT is a piece of digital art. Maybe they'll think it's a JPEG, and then what's the point? I can just right-click save, and I have NFTs. Why are people paying $23 million? That makes no sense. The reality is that the digital art piece has been the entry point, and it's been a great entry point because it's something that everybody can relate to. Young, old, male, female, people understand, appreciate in their own way or another art in some form. The reality is that NFTs are so much more than digital art, and of course NFTs on the art side are suffering with ETH where it is with the rest of the crypto. But use cases of NFTs, I think, are going to be really important. And touching back on, I think it was Hagay said earlier, talking about how BTC was sort of there, but a lot of protocols are obviously on Ethereum. I mean, people talk about Bitcoin being the digital gold. I think Ethereum is, if you will, the digital crude oil, and the Ethereum network being the refinery. And NFTs are one of the few things so far that have been created in this refinery. And NFTs from here will expand into collectibles, into ticketing, into anything that it needs proof of ownership, authenticity. So could even go and attach to traditional art as well. I'm working personally within Gemini. We're working with a lot of the big auction houses, Christie's, Sotheby's, Bonhams, and of course they're also getting involved in the auctions of the digital art pieces, but they're also working with exchanges to understand how we can adapt NFTs for sake of provenance within art. So I think this is going to be actually where the blockchain space breaks further into the real world and pieces that's of everyday life that people will be able to understand, digital passports, health records, birth records, land registry, and this will be even more important in developing countries than I believe in the Western world.
I think another way to look at it is like a lot of crypto is about creating an internet native way to think about money and about transferring it from one place to another without tying it to any authority in the physical world or in the or on the state level. Similarly, you think of any piece of content or other forms of assets that are non-fungible, which is most of the assets in the world. And today, in order to move them around over the internet, you need some sort of legal agreement that ties back to the state and to the physical world that will provide the validity of the IP rights or whatever it is that yields value from that asset. NFTs is a brand new primitive that lets you do that in an internet native way. So certainly for anything that is born in the digital world, it eliminates the need to take that back into the physical world and try to tie that back in there in order to move it only in the digital world and then enforce those rules somewhere in some state, even though the whole thing is international and on the cloud. So the potential of that to change how value moves for anything that is non-fungible, that is a specific asset, is immense. And I believe that that alone means that the potential for NFTs is pretty much, well, it's kind of uncapped. It's gigantic.
I want to add on that NFTs, it's not just about the Bored Ape Yacht Club or any as Stephanie mentioned, any art collection. I think that it's about time that crypto conference would use a proof of attendance protocol and connect that to the metaverse. It's called POAP. And this will allow, I think, the mobility of more real use cases of using NFT, not just for art collection or collectibles in general. Moreover, I think that when you look at our digital identity, while users are now storing their crypto assets on wallets, as we mentioned earlier, it will be a time where NFT would use to be our digital identity. When you dock the wallet into the future DeFi exchanges or any other use cases on DeFi, that you will use that digital identity. Everything will be tokenized. I mean, your career, if it's your university certificates, if there's any achievement, and anything that you have under your identity, and you can have a few, but then you can use those in order to verify. And this correlates together with what we spoke about earlier about regulation. And I think that would bring like a kind of another way to regulate the industry, because the identity and the privacy in DeFi is a bit problematic. But I think in a sort of a way it will need to evolve and mature to that point.
So is this not working? I can talk. Can you hear me? Or? Thank you. As we're nearing the end of the panel, I do want to zoom out for a second. And Yonatan, you have a perspective of an investor, and maybe ask you, in this new world that we live in with all these innovations we're talking about, what has changed in the type of companies and ventures that can become successful, that can become funded? Maybe what is today and what is it versus, say, a year ago? What has changed?
Yeah, I think valuations. That's a good thing for me. But more seriously, I think fundamentally, nothing fundamental has changed for me. Been in this space since 2014. I've never shorted anything. I've never bought and sold something within a year. I know how to invest in technology and not as a trader. So, and I think that's the case for a lot of the people investing in early stage stuff, which is probably what a lot of the people here are more interested in. So I think this in a strong bull like we've seen in 17 and in 20, 21, and also even before that, but most prominently in these two, there's an ability to make a lot of money very fast by flipping something. So you simply have access, and then in the bull, things run up very fast, and thanks to that access, you can then sell them and make a lot of money. So a lot of the ventures we see, a lot of what it attracts a lot of talent. That's actually a good thing also for the long term. But what happens is that you have the ability to look like a really smart investor or builder or participant in this market simply by being at the right place at the right time. I think, for me, I've never had the guts to try and bet on these fast things, but rather try to think of how you build long-term value, and I think that hasn't changed. That also means some more emphasis, to be more specific, maybe more emphasis on things that have a potential business model rather than things that rely on just, oh, I'll have a token, it will fly up because I'm able to make noise. So that's one example. I think areas that are close to the things that are already building in areas that are already close to things that are working in crypto is also advantageous in a bear. So something that touches on-ramp, off-ramp trading, stable coins, things that have been proven to work and function and have high volume, those things will be easier to fund than things that, for example, a new NFT collection, which is inherently experimental and relates to speculation. So closer to a business model, closer to the things that work, much more focus on long-term. And also what happens in the bulls that you see things that get financed heavily way before they launch. And there's been some crazy examples, like Illuvium or whatever. You see games that have reached multi-billion-dollar valuations before they launched, which is absurd and unheard of in Web 2 world. You're not gonna see those. You're gonna have to put things out in the world and make them work and see some traction before you're able to raise significant funds for them. That doesn't mean seed investing is dead. You can still raise on a deck, but it doesn't get to those magnitudes or anywhere near that. So you have to focus on value and putting things out to the world faster, worrying about the token, if at all, later.
I think also the technology matures. It's not mature yet. And if you look at the companies that raise money, again, and comparing the last bull run, you can see that a lot of scaling tech, a lot of companies that develop like new blockchains or new consensus mechanisms and try to really innovate new languages and new. So right now we're still not in a place where you can say that technology is mature. But I think this technology is going to be a crazy magnet for entrepreneurs for the next decades. Because imagine somebody wants to build a social network. It's impossible today. In the future, it will be possible. It will be possible to ask the user for his social graph. It will be possible to build banking apps without being a bank. So it's really democratization of financial services. There's some ideas that are so strong that you give people open source solution. It will be used.
I want to add one more point about the previous question. There's so much risk in crypto. There's so much risk in startups, and there's so much risk in crypto for all the reasons we're all aware of. But if there's one advice for entrepreneurs and kind of a difference between a bull and a bear in what gets financed, is that if you can reduce at least one layer of risk, like fundamental risk for your business, for example, you build on Avalanche, or you build on whatever near, or whatever is the next hot layer one, well, maybe think again, because there's the risk on the layer one you're building on. You might do everything right, but you just added another layer of risk in an inherently risky market. So if you can think of the areas where you eliminate risk, you make investors' decisions easier, and you focus on the one main problem you're solving rather than trying to, for some infrastructure fund or developer activity fund, you go to an unproven protocol. I think that
this is why grants don't work.
Yeah. So I think that's a big tip I've seen a lot of pitches for like someone building on Luna. They don't have a job today, even though they did an amazing thing on it.
For sure. Great. Thank you. So I think, do you want to say one more thing, Hagay? No. Okay. I think this has been very interesting. What my takeaway from this, I think I'm coming very optimistic from this, because it sounds like we both have a path to go forward in that you've mentioned a bunch of real use cases that could be relevant that we can build on. And I think a theme that we've seen here is it's time to innovate, but also start to mitigate risk. And you can mitigate risk by working in the right way from a financial perspective and then be able to work with the big banks. You can mitigate risk by scanning things from a security perspective. You can build on the right platforms. So it sounds like maybe the way to innovate right now, what's going on, is to, on one hand, bring those new use cases in, and on the other hand, find the way to mitigate the risk, because now there's a blueprint of how to do that, and we also maybe have lost some money, and we know how it looks like when you fail and when you don't. So before we wrap up, I want to do one fun thing. I'd love from each of you, tell me one thing that is the most exciting for you or exciting for you that's being built in Web3 or DeFi. Just quickly, one thing that you think is amazing that people should hear about that's going on. So, Stephanie, you want to go first?
Oh, on the spot now. I think for me, it's going back to what I mentioned earlier about finding ways to coexist and finding ways to bring the majority of the universe into this ecosystem, because as we know, that we're actually a very, very small community, realistically speaking. So it's finding a way to bridge that gap. So for example, we have a Gemini credit card. It's a traditional credit card, MasterCard. You're spending in fiat like you always would. You're not buying crypto, you're not selling crypto, but your rewards are in a crypto of your choice. So you spend $20 buying groceries or putting petrol in your car, but you get immediate crypto rewards into your wallet. So people feel like, oh, well, I want to be in crypto, but I don't know how, but this is a low risk way for me to do it without making those conscious choices.
Just off the top of my head, self-sovereign identity. I think it's hyped, but it's maybe even underhyped because the promise is just very big. This idea that the world will be without passwords and reusable KYC and no friction, and I don't need to trust Facebook and store there all the data. But on the other hand, it's an open garden, and I can consume services, and it's a different internet theoretically. It's a promise for a different internet. So it's not even, I would say, specifically blockchain related. Blockchain is just a way to enable this.
I'll take that. Yonatan.
For me, it's around NFT infrastructure. I've invested in a couple of things around that, like Immutable X or Reservoir, protocols that essentially enable NFTs to move around, be traded from any app without going to exchange. Just changes the game for how I think content and assets will be consumed and moved in the internet. So, and I also say anybody who's in this room, it's easier to not be in this room and be very skeptical of crypto right now. You look at mainstream media, etc. So if you're here and you're patient and you're focused on value creation, then you're probably going to be on the right side of history.
All right, thank you. Hagay.
Nice. So I'm into the identity. I think it's a great thing, using NFTs for that. And I look more about the interoperability, which is a kind of lost word somewhere between the different projects out there in the blockchain. And I think that this is something that I see would drive the real adoption, that the ability to move from one project to another from different use cases and business use cases. And I think that there's missing, I may be promoting the company that I'm working in, but there's missing a gateway between, clearly there's missing a gateway between the Internet 2.0 and the Web 3.0. And I think that in order to create this mass adoption, it must start with a small step, with a kind of a gateway 2.5 that will enable that access to the majority of projects out there, do the filter, do all the basic, I would say, KYB on those projects and great solutions, and enable to interact with them in a much more secure way.
Great. Dan?
So for me, it would be things that are actually they're not related, like stablecoins and social media, but they are. It's the ability for someone to actually post whatever they want in the time where, there is a debate between what to censor and what to not, and maybe people say we need to censor and all is fine, but there is no place that can actually, under a regulatory framework, do free social media, and that's understandable. And it's the same for money, because from a realistic standpoint, there is no way for people to have their own money without the fear of going under some, deny list of whoever regulatory framework, and that's it, your dollars are gone. So stable coins as a headline for financial freedom is something which to me has not yet been achieved. So real stable coins have never been tried. That's the headline for me.
Wow, great. All right, those are great ideas. Thank you so much, everyone. It was an amazing panel. If you want to talk to our panelists, they'll be around. There's going to be a happy hour later, so you can reach out to them or reach out to the organizers to get their contact information. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.